The Bible is true in a very strange way. What you do as an educated person is sample that structure that constitutes the sum total of the texts of our civilization.
So there's a scene in the Gospels where, the Pharisees and the scribes, so they're the woke bureaucrats, really, in many ways. They're trying to trap Christ all the time because they think he's dangerous and they'd like to nail him for heresy. And so they get a lawyer to come up to him and say, Master, which you say you abide by the commandments. Which of them is the greatest? And here's the trick. The trick is, well, no matter what Christ says, they're going to nail him, because if he makes any one commandment superordinate to the others, then he denigrates the others and they can go after him on that front. So they really put him on the spot. And he says something that refers back to this principle of Mount Sinai, this idea of a horizontal and a vertical axis, right? And he says, you should love God with all your heart and with all your mind, and you should love other people as you love yourself.
If you mapped out the relationships between all the books that there are, you'd find that the most fundamental book is the biblical library. And I think that's even merely true historically. It's partly why the Museum of the Bible was so interesting to me, because walking through it, you see how the book aggregated itself across time and became fundamental. And the first book that was really widely available for printing, purchasing, and reading was the Bible. And all the books that we know about now, the millions of books that we have, emerged from that base, that trunk, and they're all related to that.
So I'll tell you the story. I'm very compelled by that story. When Moses is leading the Israelites through the desert, the story begins with a tyrannical state. And then it's the Spirit of God that leads the Hebrews. Maybe it's the Spirit of God that characterizes the Hebrew longing for freedom. And then the tyranny might be, well, is it the tyranny of a state? Or is it the tyranny we impose on ourselves? And I would say probably both. Why not both? The story could be referring to both. We tyrannize ourselves with our own presuppositions all the time. And then you might ask yourself, why? Why don't we just give up our tyrannical presuppositions? Because they're not worthy and they're oppressive, but we don't give them up and we often celebrate them.
So it isn't that the Bible is true. It's that the Bible is the precondition for the manifestation of truth, which makes it way more true than just true. It's a whole different kind of truth. And I think this is not only literally the case, factually, I think it can't be any other way. It's the only way we can solve the problem of perception.
And then the question would be, well, what's the underlying meta principle that unites them as good? And that's exactly the question that Christ is trying to answer. So he says, well, you want to be oriented towards the highest good, conceivable. You want to be open to that. And so that would be something like making the decision in your life that you are going to strive towards whatever was good. Whatever that is, right? Just to make that the initial proposition. And then you were going to treat other people as if they were as valuable as you are, and vice versa. And that's the underlying two dimensions of the principle that gives rise to, let's say, all necessary commandments. And then I would say that the spirit that puts God above all else, puts the divine above all else, and that unites us with other people, that is what the monotheistic tendency tilts towards portraying psychologically. It's an attempt to flesh out what that is. That's how it looks to me.
First of all, they were in the tyranny. Then they had to go across the Red Sea. Now they've been wandering around in the desert, and that's not good. And so your best solution is to send a bunch of snakes in to bite them? But you think, well, even if you're in the desert after a tyranny and you lose faith, then the snakes are going to bite you, right? Because that's what happens. Because if you're in, a little analog of hell, and you lose your faith, is that going to make it worse or better? And the answer is, well, I have reason to lose my faith. It's like, fair enough. That isn't the question. The question is, what happens if you lose it? or you start looking for faith in the wrong directions. And the answer is, hell gets a little deeper. That's one of the things that really frightened me.
So, in any case, we were talking about meaning in text because we were talking about translation and the problem of understanding text. And Jim said, the meaning of words is coded in the relationship of the words to one another. And the postmodernists make that case, that all meaning is derived from the relationship between words. That's wrong because, well, what about rage? That's not words. And what about moving your hand? That's not words. So it's wrong, but part of it's right because the meaning we derive from the verbal domain is encoded in the relationship between words. So now then you think, well, let's think about the relationship between words. Well, some words are dependent on other words. Some ideas are dependent on other ideas. The more ideas are dependent on a given idea, the more fundamental that idea is. That's a definition of fundamental. So now imagine you have an aggregation of texts in a civilization. You say, which are the fundamental texts? And the answer is, the texts upon which most other texts depend.
That begs the question, what's the valid ethical domain? And the postmodern answer is, well, there isn't one. It's all the expression of domination and power. And I think that's nonsense. I don't think that's a tenable solution. I think that we stumbled onto the proper answer in some sense in our religious enterprise, which is that we aim at what's highest, or we don't. We aim at what's highest jointly, or we're divided. We aim at what's highest, and that gives meaning to all the things we do that are subordinate parts of that. We aim at what's highest, and that's what collects us and gives us structure, all of that, singly and jointly. And that's all what we've been trying to communicate all these centuries as we've been trying to communicate the whole religious corpus, generation after generation, and to sort this out and to straighten it out and to try to understand it. And I think that's where we're at now.
You have access to something like the pool of intuition, let's put it that way, that can tap you right. I would say that to the degree that that intuition is a reliable source, it's also going to be structured so that it facilitates your ongoing interactions with other people in the best possible manner. So it's not purely idiosyncratic, right? It's subject to its own logos, its own internal logic. It may be upon occasion that internal voice will do what Socrates did, Socrates' voice, which is to say, you have to offer yourself up as sacrificial victim to the mob, right? And God help us from that eventuality. But that may happen upon occasion, but it's still the case that if that voice of intuition is deep when it rises within you, it's going to rise up within you in a manner that facilitates your integration with the social community and the social community's improvement.